Hello friends, welcome back to the Turf Shack. Today I'm going to be sharing a song that I started writing a couple days ago and I was working on it some more this morning. I don't know if it's finished yet, I honestly can't tell. But I'm going to share what I have so far at the end after I just chat about a few things. I was just thinking, I'll just come have like a little smorgås vlog, if you will. So fun thing, I bought like a hair crimper the other day just out of like vibes and nostalgia. And then I was texting one of my friends and she was telling me how like she saw this like list of like hair trends and how like crimping is coming back, and I was like, ah. And then we bonded about how fun it is when we accidentally find out we're cool. But it's interesting because, maybe not to everybody, but it's interesting to me because I actually prefer my hair with like a little bit of texture, but it's easier to manage when I straighten it. But even though I'm black, my hair is like super fine, and so it doesn't always respond well to like constantly braiding it, unbraiding it, and all that kind of thing. It's like way too much manipulation, and it also like makes these things that are called like single strand knots, or sometimes people call them like fairy knots, but basically it's exactly how it sounds. Like there's one strand of hair, but somehow it manages to get a knot in it, and then it will like snap off, which is kind of the worst because, especially if you're trying to like retain length, because it can snap anywhere, and it's different from like a split end that travels upward because you can kind of catch it and like, keep it from traveling up. So I was watching this other girl who loves Jesus, and she has like this gorgeous hair that she's grown out. And she was talking about this method called like dusting, where you basically hunt each of your strands. You don't have to be like obsessive about it, but you hunt for like the little single strand knots, and then you like cut them out, and then that way you're at least not getting as much breakage, which is nice. So that's like one of the methods that I'm implementing. And then the other thing was, even though this is definitely from me braiding it and unbraiding it, because this is like a week and a half into the last time that I did my hair, but with a crimper, you can have the instant gratification of texture without as much manipulation. Because if you use heat correctly, ironically, my hair actually prefers that. So anyway, fun fact, that's free. Was there something else that I was going to chat about before I get into things? I don't think so. I think, I don't know. We'll see. So I kind of wanted to talk about what I've been thinking lately about music, based off of some comments that I got on my music on the internet. And it's interesting because I was thinking about it. I'm like, I don't really know what I expected to happen. Like, I put my music out there and I asked people to listen to it, but then some people have like so much feedback, and I'm like, okay, but nobody asked you. Sometimes it's constructive and helpful, but then other times it's like you're not telling me anything that I don't already know, which by itself was actually really good for me to realize, because I'm somebody that's like, I'm passionate about helping people become the best version of themselves. And what I've had to learn in recent years is that not everybody wants to, A. B, I'm not necessarily telling people something they don't already know about themselves. And I have to like keep that in check, you know what I mean? And I've gotten a lot better about it, but it is still a thing where it's like, because I care so much and I see what God puts in people and I want to help them like bring it out, sometimes I can be a little bit too forthcoming with unsolicited advice. I've gotten a lot better though, like I just said, like a lot better. Anyways, so similarly, I was sharing my record that I made, Dissonance, and the funny thing is, I shared it on this particular Reddit thread that I didn't realize was like a constructive feedback Reddit thread. So then people are like listening and they're responding with like, oh, okay, this is good, but here's XYZ, and I'm like, oh, this is the thing. But it was actually really helpful, and at the end of the day, I really appreciated it because I don't tend to get a lot of that. So it was good for me. But then this person like was on YouTube commenting on like the official, because basically when you distribute your music through a distributor, which as I mentioned before, those are probably the last couple songs that I can see that I'm doing that way, but I did do it that way already. And so that was the weird thing. It's like they're commenting and then they're finding another video and commenting like, yeah, I put this on the other video and here's what I think. And I'm like, I get it, but like the music is already released, babe. Like I can't do anything about it. But it was interesting because basically what he was saying was like, on this particular song, he was like encouraging me to branch out and explore my range, and he felt like it was very tight and like it sounded like one long verse was what he said. And in that particular song, I did it on purpose. But generally speaking, it's so hard to do all the things all by yourself when that's not your jam. You know what I'm saying? Like, I appreciate the feedback, and I don't want this to come across as defensive, and I don't want to alienate any listeners. So again, thank you for listening and for the feedback. But it was just interesting because it made me realize that, like, we all know so little about each other, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that is how I'm trying to relate this back to where I start. I feel like I'm already on a tangent 5 minutes in, but we'll get there. Just track with me. Because as I've said before, I feel like an artist's work that you know about is the tip of an iceberg, right? And so it's like, for me, these are songs, like I said, that I wrote over the span of 12 years. And so what that means is some of the songs I wrote when I was 23 years old. Some of the songs I wrote when I was 35 years old. You know what I mean? And besides all that, I had to also record the instrument, record my voice, and produce it all by myself. And so some people are really good at that, but I'm not, and I'm okay with that. But again, in this particular song, the way that I wrote it and the way that I recorded and produced it was very intentional, because it was serving to underscore the tension and feeling of being stuck in a situationship where, like, you want it to go further than it's going and the other person is not there, right? And so his comment, actually, I guess, was a compliment in disguise, because I achieved that. But it was, like, lost on him that that's what I was going for. And I will say again, like, I know that what I am going for a lot of times can be executed a lot better. And so that's why I'm taking a little bit of a break before I release other stuff, because I, like you, dear listener, would like for it to be better than it is. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, if you don't start where you are, you stay where you are. And so I was thinking about that, though, in a little bit of a deeper level. And I was also thinking about it slightly unrelated in the context of what I shared on my podcast like a week ago. So if you don't know or you didn't listen, I have a podcast called Color and Emotion. And on the last episode, I was talking about comfort and consumption, and the way that God is the God of all comfort is how the Bible describes him. And he's also an all-consuming fire. And I've been fasting. So that was the other part of this song that I'm about to share. It's like a little bit all over the place. But again, track with me, and I think you'll be able to keep up with where I'm going here. So I've been fasting, and I've been fasting, like, in a layered way. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but, like, for one thing, I was just not having any lattes at all. But then there was another aspect of a fast that I was doing. But this past Saturday, I had my first latte of the year. And it was great. But it also was, like, in the time in between that, part of why I went ahead and had one, because the fast was, like, ending, but also I realized that I need to not be afraid to reincorporate certain things into my diet, and that sometimes it's easier to be all or nothing and lean on the nothing side than it is to have actual moderation, temperance, and self-control. And that part of what I've been processing with the Lord while I've been fasting is walking through, like, okay, what have I lived through in the past few years? And what am I still carrying that I need to let go of? And, like, how am I finding too much comfort in the things that I consume, right? And so I was processing that specifically with coffee culture, and then also specifically, like, in a certain season of my life where I worked at Caribou, which I loved it so much, and I was, like, homeless at the time, and there's, like, varying degrees of homeless, and I don't want to downplay other people who literally have, like, nowhere to sleep at night, you know what I mean? But I was still, like, homeless in the sense that I, like, had this random roommate that I found on Craigslist and was living in her, like, spare in-law bedroom suite, and it was stressful. So she was great, and it worked for a while, but it wasn't meant to be long term, and it ended up being longer term than either of us was really going for, but it was a whole thing. So that's, like, a lot of what I was, like, dealing with at the time. And I was, like, broke because I couldn't find another job besides Caribou. And so, like, half of the time, like, I was eating whatever was left over at Caribou, and I was, like, using my tips that I got to get gas to go home. You know what I'm saying? So I was going through it. And Caribou is glorious and amazing, but nobody's meant to, like, subsist on a diet of Caribou. Even as delicious as their coffee cake is, it's 50 grams of sugar per serving. So that's part of what has lived through, and part of what I'm literally still carrying these like couple years later. So I was just like processing that with the Lord, because it's like I wrestled with him a lot about a lot of other stuff, but then there's aspects of like how I was coping and how he was keeping me from quitting him, so to speak, that is like, okay, now that I'm a little bit further removed, I can dig a little deeper into the rest of this. And so just praying through and like recognizing, sometimes all you have to do is just like talk to your soul and yourself about it and then bring it to the Lord. And it's like, it doesn't have to be this whole thing, you know what I'm saying? So I was just like processing like, okay, like it literally was that I felt in that season of my life, like coffee and the experience of like the Caribou Lodge and the coziness therein, and how it felt like a home when I didn't have one. Like there's nothing to be ashamed of, in the sense of like I took what I could get in that season of my life, but it's not true that coffee is my only comfort, and that like, you know what I'm saying? So I just had to like break that emotional attachment to it, because it's just a beverage at the end of the day, you know what I'm saying? And I can enjoy the beverage, but that's about what you can do with beverages, is enjoy them and move on, you know? So anyway, that felt related. Maybe that'll help somebody. God bless you. But anyways, the other thing that I was thinking about was, it's related, because on Saturday I had like a real latte with whole milk, and I just had a small. I didn't feel like I needed to go big or go home, you know what I'm saying? I didn't feel like I needed to like swap out some kind of fake nut oil that claims it's some milk or whatever. And I was thinking about this verse in the Bible. I think it's in 2 Timothy, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, so you can always Google it, or maybe I'll look it up and put it in the description. But basically, the Bible talks about like what society will be like in the last days, and how like, what does it say? Imposters and evildoers will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. And I was thinking about that in terms of people who are actually one way but present themselves in another way, and in a very specific and particular context that takes on this whole moral and ideological weight to it, more than just somebody being two-faced or something like that. It's really like you're presenting yourself in a completely different way than who you actually are. And then I was thinking about how like, if you're gluten-free and you're avoiding this and you're avoiding that, and no shade, because sometimes, unfortunately, we have to do that, because like I said before, like they just be doing a lot with the food system, you know, like they don't care about us. So we got to care about ourselves, you know. But at the same time, you can't just like blindly consume a bunch of substitutes, because what are you still actually consuming? And for me, when I was processing like with God, okay, I always want to have one latte a week, and I feel like it's not an addiction to the caffeine itself, but it was really like the comfort and the ritual of preparing the latte and getting to be my own barista and just the whole thing, you know what I'm saying? So as a side note, I think probably what's going to help with that a little bit is that I've decided to like relearn how to cook, and I'm like super stoked on that, so that'll be fun. But the other thing was I had to like break down literally like, what am I consuming? And it's cortisol enhancing, and it's a bunch of estrogen that's like throwing off my own estrogen. And so then I was like doing research about like, as a woman, obviously we have our hormones go through cyclical changes and fluctuations that are at this point by design. I always say that because I'm very curious to find out, when I get to ask the Lord about it, like how much of this is because of the fall. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, back on track. So I was like, okay, I need to learn about like those aspects of my biology, because it will inform how I enjoy this beverage that I like to enjoy. So there's like a certain week where it would probably be a good idea even to have coffee and enjoy coffee. But in these other weeks of the month, I need to just let it go, because it's not doing me any favors. You know what I'm saying? So that was interesting. But again, just like breaking down like what is happening, like what am I actually consuming, and what am I requiring of my body because I want the comfort of a latte. And it's just recognizing like X amount of times a week you're having cortisol enhancement and extra estrogen, because I didn't want to have fake milk, right? And the thing too is like, before I decided to give up lattes, I had felt like my adrenals were tapping out again, which happened when I was younger. When I was in my 20s, I had like adrenal fatigue. And so I knew I needed to like make a change, but I didn't want to just like abstain for a while and then go back to the same. Like, I don't want that cycle. I wanted to just fix it. You know what I'm saying? So the Lord has helped me with that. The other thing too was like a practical thing where it was like I would buy ingredients, but then the ingredients, as soon as you open them, they're like not as fresh. So then it's like now I feel like I have to have 5 lattes a week because I went and bought milk and espresso. You know what I mean? So just like also not being cheap and like poverty minded in my head about it has helped. And that's the same thing too with like the whole like clear your plate mentality. It's like, or you don't have to, you know what I'm saying? And so just retraining myself to have smaller portions to begin with, and also not freaking out if I like don't finish everything that I bought, because it's really not that serious. Anyway, I didn't intend to go that long on the tangent. The point is about what is something made out of, right? So in similar way that like when you have a latte, you have caffeine and milk, which has other benefits, right? Those two things can benefit you, but not the way I was going about it. So similarly, if I'm like not having gluten, but then I'm having like fake bread that's made out of soy and corn like 12 times a day, at some point, just eat a piece of bread, babe, because you're not doing yourself any favor. Because soy, again, it's like has all this extra estrogen. Corn is like an inflammatory food, the way that they produce that nowadays. So just kind of like processing with the Lord, like all those things. So coming back to the song that I wrote, I was thinking about all of that, and I was reading, and so all of that has to do with like the fasting aspect, right? Because I think sometimes as an American, we feel entitled to everything all the time. And it's like, fasting is about actually giving it up and letting your flesh whine about it, cry about it, die to it, right? Not how many different substitutes can I find so that I don't actually feel the impact of this choice that I made. It's like, at that point, just eat it. You know what I mean? But if you really want to fast, you're going to feel that. And so that's what I was kind of like processing and working through. And it's been great. Anyways, so part of the song that I wrote comes from Isaiah 58, where the Lord is speaking to the ancient people of Israel about their shenanigans yet again. And he's like, you guys are always talking about like, oh, we're fasting and you don't care. And he's like, but so what? You're fasting. You're doing a bunch of other ridiculous stuff that I would rather you not do. You know what I'm saying? And then there was also some verses in like Romans chapter 11 and Romans chapter 15 that I was processing and thinking about, where the Lord talks about the people of Israel as like the root of Jesse and like the seed of Abraham, and like just, you know, promise carriers and people who are carrying his story. And then I saw like this thread on Reddit where somebody was talking about like the ongoing conflict in that region of the world between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and then the surrounding nations that are predominantly Arab and Muslim, and then the group of people specifically in Palestine. And they were saying like, how does this end? You know what I'm saying? Because this one group that is like very loud and like has subtle and not so subtle leadership and control over the ideology in this region, like they are not going to be satisfied until this other group of people just does not exist at all, right? And it's interesting because when you believe and read the Bible, even if you don't come to all the same conclusions that I come to, you do see that Jesus is the answer, right? And right now, neither people group are accepting that. So it's like, what did you think was going to happen? But it's interesting when people don't have that framework and they've like already just like written that off as like the actual truth and solution. It's like interesting to see people's thought processes and how they think things are going to play out. But I'm always comforted in the fact that we don't have to be in the dark about that, because God already shared how this all turns out. So those are some of the things that I was processing when I was writing the song. But then because of this comment that the person made, I was like, I don't know, I was just kind of like not as jazzed about the songwriting process because it uses the same 2 chords that I always use. And, well, that's not true. I don't always use the same 2 chords, but I've used them quite a bit lately, and it just kind of was like, I don't know, I think it took a little bit of wind out of my sails, because again, it's not something I don't already know, but it's also interesting because the process of like writing a song is very different than the process of producing a song. And that production element is something that in the back of my mind, I always know can really take a song from feeling exactly like all the other songs that I wrote and give it this very unique personality in life. And that actually brings to mind something else I want to talk about with my specific process. and how I have kind of come to just accept my limitations as a songwriter, but also like to just like go with it and celebrate that simplicity in my songwriting. Because like there are other artists who I feel like a lot of their songs sound the same, but they're not all exactly the same. And so I like the familiarity and the comfort that comes when they come out with a new song that sounds like them. You know what I mean? And no, I'm not in the mood to listen to all of their music all the time, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth them having made the music. And the way that I was kind of thinking about it is like in the terms of like family, right? I'm the middle of 5 kids, and we look alike, especially depending on like seasons and hairstyles and that kind of thing. But we're all very different, but we're all definitely related. And it's like we grew up with other families that had a lot of kids. Like our whole family is big. We have a lot of cousins. And it's like one of those things where it's like sometimes you have a family that's like got so many kids and the genes are strong. And you're like, okay, that's one of those, that's one of those, that's one of those. But you might just be friends with one of them and you are nice to the other ones. You know who they are, but they're not your bestie. You know what I'm saying? And the songs can be the same way where it's like, maybe one of my songs you're like, this is so good, and you hear another one you're like, could do without it, or it sounds too much like this other thing or whatever, and that's totally fine. But there is somebody who will resonate with each of those kids, right, in the family. And so that's kind of, I've really had to like talk to myself about that for years at this point. And again, I'm not being defensive. I get it. I totally get it. I don't want to listen to my own music all the time. You know what I'm saying? And that's the other thing that I've had to kind of like come to terms with, but also celebrate, is that I don't exist in a vacuum or in isolation. I'm one of many voices in this era of human history where the Lord is, you know, speaking and singing through a lot of people. And that's cool. And it takes the pressure off, because it's not all up to me to be like entertaining and to make your whole music library full of like diversity and inclusion. Like I don't, you know what I'm saying? I could just do my part and be me, and that's cool. So all that to say, oh, the other thing was, an example of this is like the song Chalk that I've been talking about, where it's like, when I wrote it, it does have a very simple and familiar chord structure and progression, and it's very, like, it's just verse, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. You know what I mean? Like, that's about what I do. But when Joey got his hands on it, and he swapped out the acoustic guitar for synth as the primary instrument, and did all this like fun stuff, it really just gave the song this kind of like personality that I knew in my mind it could have, but I didn't have the skill to create all of that. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of stuff like that. And then I also know in the back of my mind all the other stuff that I've done and how I want to present that. And so for those reasons, I'm really okay with like myself. You know what I mean? And I've also had people comment that are like, I love how simple and stripped down your music is. And that means a lot to me, because it's like, again, that's where I'm at in my life right now. And again, I'm introverted anyway. And so I think particularly with the other person's comment about like the vocal performance, like I agree with him. Sometimes it can be boring, for lack of a better word. Oops. But I also don't feel like I have anything to prove. And I feel like there's a time and a place for things. I know I could have powerhouse vocals if I wanted to, but sometimes I'm just lazy. That's just the truth. And other times, I think the simplicity is inviting to people. You know what I mean? And when it comes to like the scripture songs and the Christian kingdom songs that I write, that has always been really important to me, is that I want people to feel like God is approachable, because he is. And so even if all you know is like 3 campfire chords on a guitar, you can have an epic worship night at your own home, because it's not about anything other than the presence of God. Amen? So, on that note, let's get to the presence of God. Amen? So, the song that I wrote, I think right now is called Return to Me, or some such. And I'm going to just take my time and play it. And if you get bored and you click away, my feelings will not be hurt. But I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that it provokes in you thoughts of God and a desire to draw near to him. That was the other thing that I wanted to just touch on, because people have no way of knowing. Like, and again, I'm not like salty about this guy, but I think I realized, because what I'm going for, like I said, can be executed better, I do think it's lost on some people. And there's so many different kinds of music in the world, but in America, we have, in this moment, a very algorithmic approach to art, right? And it's like people want to go viral because they want to eat. And so they make music a certain way, and I have never been after the mainstream thing. Before I started creating my own music, like the music I liked was the obscure music that I discovered that wasn't necessarily mainstream. And I've also always really liked rhythmic contemplative music, but a lot of times you find that music in spaces that are also like new age and influenced by spiritual influences that I don't want to be influenced by. And so sometimes the music that I make is an endeavor to fill that niche in a pure and holy way, in the sense of like being only inspired by the Holy Spirit, but still creating a space and a song for people to really unravel in the song, have a spiritual experience and encounter with the Lord. And sometimes that happens through quiet and simplicity and repetition. And it's funny because I just always remember this one time when I was in a songwriting seminar with this man who's pretty well known in certain Christian spaces as a songwriter. He wrote a lot of stuff, but one of the ones that I think most people know is probably Come Behold the Wondrous Mystery. He co-wrote that song. And I remember one time we were in this like songwriting thing, and it was like an ongoing program for a couple weeks, and he was making some kind of suggestion, and I was like, yeah, that's gonna be super like redundant. He's like, no, it's repetitive, which is different. And that always stuck with me. Like, repetition does not have to be the same thing as redundancy. So it's funny that like sometimes that is the critique I get, because sometimes it is repetitive and sometimes it is redundant, but either way it's okay, because we need to hear the same things over and over again. And again, we need to give ourselves space to actually like process life. So hopefully this came across with the love in my heart that I wanted it to come across with. I do appreciate that the person was listening and took the time to write out that comment that they wrote out. And I appreciate the way that it helped me kind of think through, where can I improve and where do I need to stick with what I know works and what I'm good at. So now I'm going to play the song for you guys. And I'm going to hopefully, like I said, it's not really done, but this is where we're at right now with it. I am the Lord and I do not change, therefore you are not consumed. I how it goes so far. Sorry, my voice is like shot after all of my ranting. The irony. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I forgot to mention the other place in the Bible that I was reading is Malachi 3. So, if you're interested and you want to know where the lyrics came from, Isaiah 58, Malachi 3, and Romans chapter 11 and chapter 15. All right, friends, thanks for listening today and always. Thanks for the feedback in the comments. I do appreciate it, even if I disagree. And I will be back to chat to you soon. Okay, bye.